This morning I'm going to do our Bible reading, which is from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and that's going to come up on the screen for you. So 2 Corinthians 8, you can flick to it in your own Bible there, or you can read along as the words come up on the screen. So 2 Corinthians 8, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Now, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. For I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more, and they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They even did more than we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to do. So we have urged Titus, who encouraged your giving in the first place, to return to you and encourage you to finish this ministry of giving. Since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. I'm not commanding you to do this, but I am testing how genuine your love is by comparing it with the eagerness of the other churches. You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. Here is my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Give in proportion to what you have. Whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. And give according to what you have, not what you don't have. Of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourselves. I only mean that there should be some equality. Right now you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. As the scriptures say, those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. But thank God, he has given Titus the same enthusiasm for you that I have. Titus welcomed our request that he visit you again. In fact, he himself was very eager to go and see you. We are also sending another brother with Titus. All the churches praise him as a preacher of the good news. He was appointed by the churches to accompany us as we take the offering to Jerusalem, a service that glorifies the Lord and shows our eagerness to help. We are traveling together to guard against any criticism for the way we are handling this generous gift. We are careful to be honorable before the Lord, but we also want everyone else to see that we are honorable. We are also sending with them another of our brothers who has proven himself many times and has shown on many occasions how eager he is. He is now even more enthusiastic because of his great confidence in you. If anyone asks about Titus, say, he is my partner who works with me to help you. And the brothers with him have been sent by the churches, and they bring honor to Christ. So show them your love and prove to all the churches that our boasting about you is justified.
Thank you very much, Jason. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you all. And just before we get into the teaching this morning, which is going to be a little different, you'll see that there's three of us here. And Damien is joining us, as well as Julie and myself, for this final message in our Money Wisdom series. Before we get into that, though, I do want to say a big thank you to our tech crew who are off camera. Obviously, none of you can see them, but they are making all of this possible for you to appreciate from your home. So big thank you, tech crew, for all your hard work. We really love and appreciate all that you do, not just this week, but all the other weeks that you're involved. So, okay, money wisdom. We've already had 4 messages on this, and this is our final one. And we've already let you know that this morning we're focusing on generosity. But just as a very quick recap, so week 1, these slides will come up on the screen. So we looked at the biblical foundations, and we saw that there are 6 foundations: grace, reward, humility, participation, percentage, and another one I can't remember. And then week 2 was all about the biblical pattern, the money, wisdom there, and we looked at that, and we said that the scriptures teach us that we first of all give to God, and then we save, and then we care for the poor, and then we work out our living costs and expenses from the rest. Week 3, we looked at the eternal perspective, and all of these messages are available online. Week 4, last week, we looked at true wealth, and we said that true wealth is godliness with contentment until our Lord Jesus Christ comes again. That's using Paul's references from 1 Timothy 6. Today is generosity, as I said, and really our key text today is from 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verses 1 and 2. Let me just read that to you again, where Paul says, and this is his personal letter to the church in Corinth. He says, "I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia." Now, you might want to get a map actually and have a look at where the churches in Macedonia are situated and where Greece is situated. They're quite a long way away from one another geographically. Paul says this to the ones in Corinth, which is part of Greece, and he says to them, "These churches in Macedonia are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy." I love that. "Which has overflowed in rich generosity." So what a great description, what a great thing, that in the middle of extreme hardship and difficulty, these believers in Jesus are filled with great joy, and that joy overflows in this radical generosity, this rich generosity and what Paul's doing, for those of you familiar with what's going on, and those of you that aren't, just a reminder that Paul is actually, the church in Jerusalem is going through a very difficult time. There's a famine, and so he's actually, since that's the birthplace of the good news about Jesus Christ, it's spread all throughout the Roman Empire, Paul is sending these men to these different churches, and they're giving in to an offering that's going to go back to Jerusalem to help and support the believers in Jerusalem through a very, very difficult time. And this is part of the whole way that the church globally still works and helps today. And we've had an update in New Life News the last couple of weeks, and I hope you've had a really good look at that to see how the generosity of New Life Church has overflowed and gone into other places. We've been able to send our money to places we certainly can't go at the moment, and for it to be used by believers in those places for God's purposes there. So, Damien, who's here with us this morning, welcome, Damien. You're making your platform debut, I think.
Thanks, Wayne.
A couple of questions then. Really, Damien, I want you to introduce yourself so that people get a bit of context about why you're here. So you're a member of the board, you're a member of the overseers. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yep, no worries. So I joined what was then called the executive leadership team in 2010. And currently I'm part of both the overseers team and the board, and I wear the hat of treasurer at the moment as well.
And you wear it well. So now, and Damien, what's your day job?
Obviously, husband and father. I also, my paid work, if you like, is with a mining company. My role there is in the water planning space, so I'm really looking 5 to 10 years ahead for the business, making sure the right work's getting done to enable the business plan. And that requires me to be driving quite a lot of, stewarding a lot of dollars and studies, and then also, quite large sums, talking tens to hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure planning for the business that they need to build into their bigger plans. You know, mining companies tend to have the budgets of small countries these days.
It's phenomenal, yes. And here in Western Australia, of course, the mining industry is a great contributor to the Western Australian and the Australian economy as well. And so you're part of all that. And now, one of the core values that New Life has had as a church is generosity. And Damien, you're the treasurer, you get an inside look at that. And so I want you to unpick that a little bit, what that looks like from the inside for our church.
Yep, happy to. There's a slide with a bit of a pie chart that gives you a sense of scale and shape here, but the headline numbers first. From the 1999 to today, which is the better part of 22 years, we've given $1,634,000 away from ourselves as a church. And that, if you sort of divide that by 22, that's about $74,000 a year that we're giving away from ourselves as an overflow of what comes into New Life Church. There's a number of different components to that giving. From the local context, we've given over $810,000 into, when I say local, that's national, but predominantly into the Fremantle region, it would be fair to say. $580,000 of that is via the Jubilee Welfare Fund, which is a registered charity which has a designated area that it can function in, and that's around giving to people in necessitous circumstances and within Australia, and again, predominantly within our local communities. And also from the New Life Poor Ties, we've what we call our Compassion and Mission account. About $230,000 of that has also gone into our local context. Then you can see the shades of orange and brown, the international giving on that chart. Up to $460,000 has gone away from us into really missionaries and international ministries with a particular focus on the Middle East, Israel and the persecuted church. Again, to what Wayne spoke of before from the 1 Corinthians 8, where the opportunity to bless our brothers where we can't physically be there and assist, we can send our finances. And also, in terms of the giving, another one that's a large component of this giving has been into the building fund, or the House of Prayer vision for New Life. And there was, for those who were around in 2010, a large amount of those funds came in through a special offering in our church at that time, and they were able to be utilised a number of ways through the years to support our church, but obviously with the establishment of our new offices and prayer room, that's been a real blessing and key to that being able to be established at this time.
Sure has. Yep.
So they're the kind of the stats, the overview. Wayne, Julie, is there anything that you want to unpack from those stats for us?
Well, it's inspiring to hear that again. Just the faithful year-on-year giving, and we hope that you are encouraged, New Life Church.
Yeah, I hope you're all jumping up and down in your lounge rooms and going, wow.
By the generosity and the different ministries that we've been able to sow into, and the people that we've been able to, the poor people, in our midst and elsewhere that we've been able to help.
And the key thing is it hasn't happened by accident. Yep. It's this thing, and Paul picks it up in this passage in 2 Corinthians 8, where he talks about the churches in Macedonia. They first of all gave themselves to God, and secondly, they gave themselves to the ministry, and the money flowed from that perspective. And it always happens like that. It's always, first you give yourself to God, then you give yourself to one another, and then the giving flows out of that practice.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see how the biblical pattern for giving that we've been teaching since 2009, actually, which is the Teruma tithes and poor tithes. Interesting to see that's actually mirrored in the annual amount. So there's been a real grace of giving.
Yes.
That
There has,
God.
yeah.
So that $74,000 that you're talking about, Damien, if you average it, that annual amount, when you do the percentages, actually, the corporate giving is mirroring those percentages that we teach people individually to commit to and to see as a biblical pattern of giving.
It's massive.
Yeah,
Actually,
it didn't
it's
set out to do that, but that's how it is.
Yeah.
We teach that, we give like that, and it's been mirrored corporately as a whole church.
Yeah.
All right, we'll step it back in terms of how, asking you the question here of how God's shaped and taken you on a journey of personal challenges to really discipline you in the area or shape your generosity view, if you like.
Yeah.
So if you can share some of that
been a
story.
journey.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
it
ahead,
has
Jill.
been. So Damien's asking us personally right now. Okay, so we're really going back. We're really going back here. So we've been married for 37 years.
Almost. Next month.
Next month.
Next month,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
it. 37. Before I got that right. And when we got married, we had nothing.
True.
We had nothing, and
I'd paid off all my debts.
yes.
Yeah, started at ground zero. So
Ground zero is excellent.
Yeah.
Better to go in with no debt.
Yeah.
And so, but it was a real, it was a real journey, and it was an amazing journey. It was an amazing journey. And for many years, in fact, I would say until 2006, Wayne, 2006, when we built our home in Belia, we lived from week to week. As much as we wanted to have savings, there wasn't the surplus. And so that's a long time.
we had
To
two
be-
teenage sons at that time. And
Yeah, we
they eat
did.
a lot.
They do eat a lot. It's amazing. So we have encountered God as our provider, Jehovah
Faithful.
Jireh. He's been
Been
faithful. He has never let us down. So we want to just give a few examples here, really going back now. In our first year of marriage, we had bommy cars for a long time. In fact, those of you in New Life Church can remember our old cars. I'm sure you can. But we had this van because we were focused on youth ministry at that time.
We were.
And we had this long wheelbase. What was it?
It's a Mazda.
A Mazda long wheelbase.
van.
You can fit more kids in the back if it's
Yeah.
if it's a long wheelbase.
Yeah.
No seats. You were allowed to in
you're-
those days.
yeah,
Well, kind of.
well.
So anyway, we had this van, and the youth group was having a camp. Now I can't actually remember why we weren't going on that camp.
I think because we were new parents.
Oh, maybe no.
No?
First year of marriage, love.
Okay.
Come on.
Oh, no,
Um,
no, that's true.
So, anyway, there was a reason. But
Yeah.
the youth leaders had asked us if they could borrow our van, just basically load it up as you do when you take the youth down south. And this was our first test, I remember, being as a married couple. It was like, okay, so God wants us to share things. He wants us to share our belongings. And so we prayed about it, and we felt like, yeah, God, yeah, we're gonna lend our van to a trustworthy, the guy who was going down with the team. Actually, it wasn't a youth camp. That's why we weren't going. It was a worship team. They were taking a team down to minister. That's right, a worship team. So anyway,
Small country church.
Yeah, small country church. So we lent it, and we lent it happily. But after we had contemplated, that decision, and also how that impacted everything, all of our possessions and everything we owned, and how we should steward them, well, the youth group, they got back, this small group of young adults, and they got back, and I remember them breaking the news to us that the engine had blown up. Like, in that long trip, something about the oil had all blown out through the rings. I don't know. I don't understand
Yeah, something
vehicles.
like that.
But in those days, that was relevant. So, And our van came back to us useless. And
They limped back up Albany Highway.
yeah, very slowly. And you know what? They never offered even to pay anything. Like nobody took up an offering to even give us anything towards fixing it. And we were just like, oh, okay, thanks. And we didn't have the money to fix it.
Yep.
And
I was a theological student,
and
full-time.
I was, we just didn't have the money.
Yep.
And I remember us having lots of conversation about this and talking to God about it and saying, but God, we felt like you said to do this and we want to live generously. And look what's happened to our van. Anyway, God provided. Long story short, God did provide and our van got fixed. And at no cost to us because somebody else stepped in. That was a big test.
That was a big test.
But what about the time when we got that bill, Wayne, from...
Then there was another one. So this is all the time God shaping us and going, well, do you trust me or do you trust your stuff? That's the question I think God was putting to us in that decision. Even though that we had nothing. So we were kind of thinking, we do trust you, God. It's like, well, let's just test that theory, basically. And so the next one was a couple of years later. So now I'm still a theological student. I think this is now Nathan has been born.
Yep.
So I'm working part-time, I think 2 days a week for the church, studying part-time. I'm the youth pastor at this church.
Still no money, in other words.
And but we had to get our tax done. I spoke to a friend of mine who was a pastor. I said, is there a good tax guy you can recommend? He recommended to me this Christian guy. We went, we told this, gave him all the facts and figures that you do when you give your tax. So, and,
Pretty
it's pretty straightforward and all those kind of things. And anyway, so then a couple of weeks later, we got his bill. And I can still remember the emotional trauma of opening that, expecting something, expecting something far less than what I got, because the bill was $1,600, which even today is a lot for it. It's like, wow, this is, phew. And I just remember being frozen at that point.
Yeah.
And going, this is a crisis. We'd barely earned $1,600, let alone have a bill for our accountant for $1,600. So, and again, but that was that situation of trusting God. I did call him. He graciously apologised and halved the bill. Whew, that was still bitter to swallow. But anyway, but we had been impacted by two Christian pioneers from their biographies. One was George Mueller, who started many orphanages in Europe, and Hudson Taylor, who started the China Inland Mission. And both of those men were men of prayer who would seek God. They did not tell what their needs were financially, even though they had plenty of financial needs. There was no such thing as GoFundMe pages. There was none of that even existed back then. They believed that if God had called them to do what they were going to do, that God knew where they were and God could touch people anywhere in the world and send money to them. And so that was how they exercised their faith. And we took that on board. Yeah. And we're not going to tell anyone.
We're not going to tell anyone. We're just going to pray.
We're just going to pray.
We have a need.
Say, Lord, you know us. Yeah. You know where we are. And you know where the money is. And you can bring this about. And then one evening, at the end of our Sunday evening church service, at the church where we were serving, and I went to pick up my Bible off the front seat where it had been sitting while I'd been talking and chatting to people. I found inside an envelope with several $100s. I can't remember exactly the amount, but it was a significant proportion of what we needed. And so that
we were
was
amazed
part of it.
because we had not told anyone.
And so this thing of God, you can be trusted.
Yeah, such
God,
a
you're
blessing.
faithful. Yeah.
So encouraging.
Yeah.
And I suppose the next big thing was when we were pastoring at Lakeside, and we sensed God, just moving quickly here now, calling us to somewhere. We were on the move. He was moving us. We didn't exactly know when at the time. But anyway, it all became clear over that year. We resigned. We went to the States. But that was an interesting process as well, because again, we didn't have money in the bank. Now, by this stage, God had been gracious to us, and we had got into a home in Katanning, where we'd been 4 years previously, through the Key Start, thing. Again, no deposit, but we got in, and then we sold that house and moved to Perth, and we had just enough to buy a little house in Coolbellup, and back then the little Coolbellup houses were a lot cheaper than they are now.
Yes.
And we were able to get into this house, and it was equivalent to paying rent most likely, and that's really what we had. And again, we had this house that was a little bit paid off, well, not much, but and our belongings. And I remember, this is cutting a long story short, but when God had confirmed where we were going, what it was to be, and we added up all the costs, we were like, well, God is going to provide.
Yes.
And for you,
Convinced
Wayne,
about that.
You were convinced,
Yes.
and somebody was going to come put a check in our hand. You were convinced about
was.
that, because this is
Yes.
how God provides.
That's what he
when you don't
does.
have the money, when you have no means. And God, God was really, He was so patient and kind, and He spoke to us about the pearl of great price.
Yes.
And He said, "Go fund yourselves." He said, "Sell everything you've got.
Yeah.
That's my plan for you."
Yeah.
And it was such a test, another test. Go sell what you've got. You have enough. We had just enough. Our home was sold on New Year's Eve.
Yep.
And when the little bit that we had in the home went into the bank together with everything that we had, and there were people in this church who bought our rubbishy old electrical items just so that we could get over the line.
Help us, yes.
And gave them back to us when we came back,
Garage
mind
sale.
you.
Yeah.
We got over the line, just got over the line, enough in the bank to get the visa. And God was saying, you can trust me. He said it again, you can trust me. You can trust me. And He provided all the way through, but there was another lesson, wasn't there, Wayne, in the States?
In the States
no income.
is that willingness to, the invitation from God to give to Him. We didn't have an income. We're living off savings. That's being eaten away. And in that place of having that sense, and that God wanted us to continue to say, God, our trust is in you, and to give into things.
Yeah, because we didn't every day we didn't want to have that conversation, and it was starting to happen. It was like, well, we can't afford that. Well, can we get this? Well, no, we can't afford that, because we've got this much in the bank. And we sat down and we said, no, hang on, this doesn't feel right. Either God is our provider or He's not.
Yeah.
And from that moment, we decided actually to tithe. And we would actually put money in the offering out of our savings when we went to church on Sundays, because our trust was in God.
Yes. Yep. So
Starting new life.
So then we came back here, and
Yeah.
the confirmation again of God speaking to us and saying, yes, I want you to start what's now become New Life Church. And of course, and so we had no resources.
Back to ground zero.
We're on ground zero.
Nothing left.
We've got no backing from a denomination or network or anything like that. And it's simply this exercise of a few people coming around us and saying, we'll join you in this venture, and we'll see what God does.
And even
so we're stepping in
we
with
were
that.
willing at that point, weren't we, to do the worker pastor thing,
Yes.
to pastor, to
Yes.
pioneer,
Yeah.
and to work day jobs. But God again said to us, that's not what I'm calling you to do.
Yeah.
I'm calling you to trust me. I want you to get on with the work. And that's what we
And
did.
that's what we did. Yes.
And in those early years of New Life, any surplus that we received, because in the first, I can't remember how long it was, 2 or 3 years, it was just it was a small number of people, and as people put their offering, whatever that was going to be, we just divvied it up and 10% always went away from that little bit. 40% was saved for resources, for operational costs. And then the other bit that was left was given to us as salary. It wasn't a salary, but it was always enough. And, you know, and in that situation, God again provided in so many different ways. But there were a few occasions in that early up to 2006 when, for some reason, we were given a sum of money. And this is what we would do. We would say, Lord, is that for us? Or do you want us to be a conduit?
Yeah.
We could use it, but Lord, if you've given it to us so that we can be a conduit to someone else, we want to do that. And that's how we lived. It's amazing how you live when you don't have enough. It's just wonderful. And they were really blessed times. And so that's what we did. And usually, and this was again God testing, you talking about God discipling us in money. Usually, God said, give it away. And he showed us who to give it to. Just before 2005, we were given a sum of money. And it was actually the biggest amount we'd ever received. It wasn't huge, but it was it was big for us. And we said the same thing again to God. What do you want us to do? And he directed us to give half of it away. So we gave it, and we kept this. We didn't know what it was for, but we were trying to get into our own home. We moved house probably 6 or 7 times.
Yes.
Rental properties in those early years of New Life. And each time we went to the bank, no, you don't earn enough.
Don't qualify for a loan.
You don't earn enough, and you don't have any savings. So that's the end of that. Well, this time it was different. Can't tell you all the details. No. But God got us into a home with no deposit. Your parents weren't guarantor on the loan. It was amazing. And that little bit that he had told us to keep was just enough to pay the stamp duty
on the purchase of the block
that we needed. And we were into our own home. And we had enough to pay the mortgage because we were renting. Just amazing. And God, we just want to give you the honor. This testimony is to give you honor and thanks because we're remembering all that you've done for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we had come to the place of peace because we had come to the place of being settled in our hearts that maybe we would not ever own our own home.
Yeah.
And in that priestly Levitical thing of God promising that he was their inheritance, we'd come to embrace that and say, Lord, if that is what happens, we will keep trusting you.
Yeah.
Because you're our inheritance, you're our great reward, and that's what we're living for. And that was actually, when you settle those issues in your heart, you just have peace. And it's a great, great thing. Yeah. So Damien, that's some of how God has schooled us. We could talk for a long time, but I think we'll keep moving on.
Thanks, Wayne. So in terms of translating those personal training ground, if you like, into when New Life Church was started, how are these giving principles sort of baked into how New Life does money?
Yeah, well, straight away, as Julie said, from the very first offering that we took up, we set aside 10% to be given away to the work of God in other places. And that's been a foundational thing and something that we have continued to do. And because we said we actually want to be a generous church, because generosity is not about how much you've got. It's about open-hearted generosity of giving away, giving yourselves to the Lord. Our God is generous, magnificently generous, beyond anything that we could really know or comprehend in terms of giving of himself and his Son to the world. And we wanted to reflect the character of God through being a generous church. So that would be the first thing I want to say. What do you want to say, Jewel?
Yeah, it's an act of trust in God. It's saying every week, and when we give away, When we give out of what people are giving, as well, and give away, it's saying, God, it belongs to you.
Yes.
It belongs to you, and we are dependent on you for your provision. Well, JWF, as you mentioned, Damien, that was started in 2003. It is a DGR charity, and it is a vehicle for giving to the poor, and that has been such a blessing, because, when crisis happens, to have a fund that New Life people, it's primarily New Life people, almost exclusively. We don't advertise this for people to give to outside, but almost exclusively New Life people give into JWF, the Jubilee Welfare Fund. And so when there is a crisis, or when someone in need, someone needs help, they need help, we are in a position to give and to support and to bless. And it's a wonderful thing for a church to be ready to give to people in need, and to have the finances there, and to make it simple and to make it easy. And so again, just thank you, New Life, because there are so many generous supporters of this charity from within this church, and it has just been such a blessing to so many. We were making 500 Christmas hampers for years in the early days, at a cost of about $35,000, to buy all that stuff and put it together. There's just so many ways that fund has multiplied, and it's just been given to others. It's been broken and pressed down and running over.
Yeah.
Yeah. The biblical festivals highlighted a pattern, God's patterns for us, and that triggered something else, Wayne.
Yeah, look, it did. I just want to back a little bit to say, coming back to these foundation stones, was one of the foundation stones was, because been ministering for 10 years before we started New Life Church, and money was always a difficult topic for, and the churches we'd been in and some of the senior pastors we'd been under would really struggle to talk honestly with the congregation, and even honestly with their board or elders about financial matters. And so one of the things that I was for both of us, but really was just to say at the beginning, we want to be a church that talks about matters that are difficult to talk about without blowing ourselves up, so to speak. We want to be able to have these kind of conversations. And part of the way that I went about that was to say, each year I'm going to teach a 4 or 5 week series on money that will encompass all of life in terms of how people use their finances. And we haven't hit it every single year, but we've hit it for the bulk of those years of doing a series like what we're doing now, and therefore making it a safe conversation. And we do it at board level, and Damien, you'll talk about that in a minute. We have the real conversations about what's going on. So that was a foundational thing as well, Damien, in the sense of wanting us to be a church that really is discipled and wise and because the church, it relies on the faithfulness of the people. We don't have, something over here called New Life Church that funds this. We together fund New Life Church. So the generosity of the people. But if the people are not discipled in knowing the ways of God, the faithfulness of God, the goodness of God, then that won't overflow. So the habit of teaching and reminding people every year, this is what God is like. This is how you do it. Because when you follow God's pattern, it's amazing. And that's what we have seen
that's our
personally.
Testimony.
That's our testimony. And that's the testimony of the church as well. So when we were going, in about 2008, we got connected to celebrating the biblical festivals. And we began to also learn that there's this other pattern which includes teruma and tithes. We got plugged into that, and we began to teach on that. And it's just following God's pattern. It's like,
He blesses his pattern.
it's kind of like, it's not hard. It might be hard to do because it's not complicated. You just obey. And so again, you come back to this thing of you set your heart to obey God, and you just do it. And he builds it, and he multiplies it. Yeah.
That's good.
And so, Damien, you came into the treasurer role. You were first of all on the executive leadership team, like it was called back then, and then more recently, you came into the treasurer role. And so, this journey, you've seen some of the inside bits of how this plays out. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I can do that. So yeah, as you said, it was a challenging experience in some ways. Had to change my perspective of not treating a church like a business. That it's how do you navigate the good stewardship and directives by faith from God. So that was an ongoing journey as part of that. So yeah, I came to the role of treasurer in 2016, and yeah, contrasting it in terms of budgeting and financial planning. Like I said, versing the business context was quite a stretch. In the business context, not only should you, but you're kind of required to have your budgets balanced and defensible and making sense from every way you look at them, so you can request the money from the MD and things happen. In the New Life context, it wasn't unusual to have the expenses outweighing the incomes, and what we, I guess, deemed it the God gap, and that was kind of a mark that we were, the budget was suitably stretched with a faith gap for us. And yeah, over those years, with the treasurer hat on, but also being part of the conversations before that, since 2010, when the vast majority of our incomes come from the Taroomba and tithes, and they've been known to fluctuate week to week, month to month, year to year. They're obviously dependent on people's context and what's going on for them and how they're engaging with the generosity walk that's in front of them. On our side of the fence, in terms of our expenses, it's dominantly salaries and rents and building costs, which are all pretty much fixed costs. So when the tithes don't come in, you don't have many levers to pull in terms of making sure the bills are paid. And on the I guess the lean side of that conversation and the years of famine, if you like, that meant we were having conversations about salary cuts on numerous occasions, which is, again, to Wayne's point, they're not fun conversations, but they're ones that you need to navigate and come out with unity on the other side of how you're going to navigate that, but also obviously in submission to God and knowing that we've prepared our budgets, submitting it to Him, and here we are, and this is just part of our training ground.
So they weren't just conversations, were they?
No, there's obviously there was seasons where there was cuts of varying degrees, and sometimes never fun and quite significant, and for extended periods. We'd always have a desire to reset things back to at least back to where they were, if not we wanted to. As a board, we always want to honour the workers and make sure they are rewarded for what they invest in us. But that's, all this is, like I said, a balancing act of how do we navigate this while keeping our eye on what God's doing in our midst. Touching a little bit on the flip side of that, in the last 18 months, there's been quite a few surprises for us, or in terms of operating costs and budgets. We've had some extraordinary things going on with the COVID hitting. We've had to accelerate our technology walk, and there was obviously some expenses in the background and some training to come up to speed on that. That was something we just had to absorb as part of functioning. And obviously we've had a building project going on as well, and I can't talk numbers here as much as just declare that God is multiplying finances somewhere in the background to bring us through this, because it's been a really encouraging season for me to, the visibility I have on that side of the ledger, if you like. You can see that God is definitely at work in our midst, and it encourages me because it gives us confidence that we are aligned with where He's breathing on what He wants us to be doing and positioning. One last thing. So, you're obviously hearing that the faith balance of a budget is something we obviously put first. How is God directing us rather than putting confidence in our own bank balance? But that doesn't mean we don't focus on being good stewards and being really focused on good fiscal management. Want to note that Lena and the staff team do a really great job of, before we ever go to talking about, historically talking about, salary cuts, we're making sure that every other penny is squeezed really tightly. And now the team do a really fantastic job of making every dollar work really hard. So I just wanted to mention that as well, because it's pretty amazing.
Big shout out to Lena, our business manager, who really all the time has been so zealous to maximise every dollar for the church.
She's become a great prayer warrior in that role.
Yes, and there's lots of stories to tell of God's provision. So, should we keep moving on? Yeah, well, Julie, so the board's made decisions. You're our pastor for vision and mission. Bring us up to speed with some of some of these things are going behind the scenes, what's emerged in our board conversations in the last 10 years.
Yeah, okay, so now we're looking at the direction, the future, the big picture of where we sense the things that God's alerting us to and to be ready for in terms of our giving away from ourselves. So this is not the operational budget. I'm talking about the giving away, because we are certain that God is going to bless New Life to be able to give away even more than we do now. So, but first of all, 2010, the Lord began to show us clearly His mandate, or really His directive, to raise a Daniel generation. So we have the college, the first 10 years of which were very tough. In case you don't know that, the first 5 years were life and death in terms of finances and the school being able to will it live or will it die, right? Yep. But and I remember one night, and Wayne had come home from a board meeting, and it really was. It was like, if God doesn't break through, it's finished.
Yep.
That we need financial breakthrough. The board of the college they'd put their credit cards on the table that night to pay the wages, and so we needed breakthrough. And so we prayed as we were going to sleep, and I was like, well, Lord, it's up to you. I mean, maybe you gave us the college for another reason. I don't know. And that night I woke up and running around in my spirit. It had obviously been going around and around in my spirit. And the Lord said this to me: don't sell your inheritance for a bowl of soup. And that was the night I knew that this college was an inheritance and an entrustment from the Lord, and that the students He was going to bring here, they mattered immensely to Him. And He had preserved this college, and He was saying, now I want you to steward this. I'm giving this. He literally gave it to us to steward for His purposes and His plans. And so that was very significant, and it has resulted in significant work and spiritual battles and hours of prayer. And New Life has given significant financial support to the college in those early years, in those first 10 to 12 even years. There's been tremendous support in the background, and the college is standing on its own 2 feet. Praise the Lord, and growing and developing and raising, that we may not be there yet, but that mandate to raise a Daniel generation is strong. And so we will continue to resource this ministry in the way God has directed us to. The next thing, which was a year later in 2011, God began to speak to the board, and he was leading us to increase our giving to ministries in the Middle East, actually. So we'd been giving money away, different things around the world, and very good causes. But he began to focus us in on the Middle East, and this is a prophetic alignment, if you like. This is aligning with the biblical scriptures. We understand. Now, I don't have time to unpack all the scriptures for you, so I'm just going to make some statements, and you'll have to go away and check it out yourself. But we understand that the epicenter of conflict when Jesus returns will be the Middle East, and particularly the battle for Jerusalem. The Bible prophecy reveals that some very significant things will be happening in the Middle East in the years leading up to Jesus' return. There's going to be a harvest of souls in the nations surrounding Jerusalem. This is biblical prophecy. In times of great pressure, and this harvest will yield wholehearted disciples of Jesus, Arabs, Muslims. I mean, it's going to happen. It's happening now in the Middle East, and we are involved in that and giving to that now. So this was 2011. We were contemplating this, and I think I'm just going to put this in here. The Bible doesn't say this, but my thinking is when I look at World War II and I look at those people, those families who hid the Jews. I think of that. I think of Revelation 12 when God says, He's preparing a place in the wilderness for Israel to hide. It's like the wilderness. Where do you hide in the wilderness? Well, they're going to be sent out. They're going to rush out of Judea and Jerusalem, and there's going to be these ones that have come to Christ, and they're going to take them in. It's going to be phenomenal. I can really see that, and Jesus himself said in Matthew 24, when he was giving, the disciples were saying, well, what are the signs, the times, and how will we know, that you're returning? And so he gives them all the signs of the time and of the end of the age. He speaks into it, and of course, none of them are going to see it at that, from this, from earth. But he lists all these things. You can read it yourself. But he gets to the end, and he's warning them about persecution and false prophets and deceiving, many, and people's love growing cold. And he finally warns them that when the abomination that causes desolation, and he references Daniel, that one, let the reader understand, that one, when that happens, those who are in Judea at that time must flee to the mountains. And from that time until the end, there will be time of great distress like the world has never seen. This is all coming into focus. And God has been shifting our perspective, and, we will always support the persecuted church, but he's shifting it to the ministries in the Middle East. Places like Iran, Israel, Afghanistan. I mean, there's many places, different places that we've given to already, and some of those ministries have been ongoing. And that is because we know that is positioning ourselves biblically to sow into a tremendous move and outpouring of the Holy Spirit. So we're wanting to equip people to be missionaries there now. We want to equip mission there now, whatever that looks like. And there's all kinds of mission that's going on. And actually there's been an upsurge of missionaries, people wanting to be missionaries in Israel to the Jews. It's amazing. So we're just telling you that this is part of the way, that this is a significant component of that overseas giving. And so Damien, at that time, in accordance with what God was speaking to us, and you had been, were you the treasurer at the time?
No,
you weren't.
No,
You weren't, actually. You weren't
yeah,
the treasurer at
it
the
was
time,
the board
but you were
member.
on the board.
Yeah.
2016, you became the treasurer. God spoke to us, and we created in 2011 a resource allocation policy. And I just wonder if you could just unpack that really quickly and briefly to give people an idea, well, how does that policy govern our giving into the future?
Sure. And yeah, I was, I think, part of a little subcommittee that was working on that at the time. So yes, this resource allocation policy is really provides the board with an agreed set of rules or principles on how we manage New Life's finances. And it's the contents of the directives of that policy help us as a board discuss and consider how best to steward funds on a decision-by-decision basis in our meetings. Tourma and tides, obviously this income that we get for operational costs is segregated in our operating account, so that money is given for a particular purpose and stewarded for that purpose. Likewise, poor tides, when they come into the New Life account, are accounted for separately, and this money is obviously set apart for a number of different purposes that we kind of touched on already, but obviously local giving to the global persecuted church, and also supporting disciple-making ministries in Israel and the Middle East, and also supporting the global prayer and worship movement. They're kind of the key areas that we go, okay, if we've got funds in this account, does it align with these areas? Is it something that we feel God's directing us to give into? And something else to be clear about is that this money in this poor tithe account, and it can be tens of thousands of dollars at a given time, is never on the table if we're talking about salary cuts or operational budgets. It's something it doesn't cross ledgers. It's set apart, it was given for a purpose, and it's stewarded that way.
Yeah.
Likewise with special offerings and the harvest offering monies, they're often given with a particular discrete purpose in mind. When people are allocating it, they say, I would like this to go to Barnabas Fund or the Persecuted Church, or this money is given just to pay for youth workers into the college.
That's right.
Or it's given for a building fund activity to establish a house of prayer. So we very much make sure one of the key principles in all of that is that the purpose that the money is given for is honoured and respected all the way through the process. Just one other thing to mention. So outside of New Life Finances, if you like, we do have obviously JWF as a registered charity, and that's money that obviously, as we described earlier, it's given to the charity for people in necessitous circumstances within our local community, and that money is stewarded according to that as well, and can completely separate from New Life Finances.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Damien. Good
yeah,
summary.
look, it's for many years, New Life, we have fluctuated between having enough and not enough, and hence the hard decisions and the several times where we've had to cut our staff salaries until that situation had resolved itself. We want to say this morning, and you've already said it, Damien, actually, but the Lord is blessing. The Lord is blessing our finances, and He's enabling us to reach new levels of generosity. And the board has committed to keep growing in generosity by giving away an annual offering over and above our current giving, as explained in the pie chart, right? The Tourma tithes, poor tithes each year. And it will be an annual expression of our thankfulness to the Lord for the many ways that He has blessed us. So it's a top-up amount. It'll be over and above the annual harvest offering. It won't be the same amount each year, but it will be an offering over and above that. And as mentioned, this principle of giving this tithe away from ourselves has been operating from the very beginning of New Life. And we are, in fact, giving away much more than a tithe. That's important to say that.
Yes, it is.
And we're just wrapping up now. I just wonder if the worship team can come up as Wayne, you conclude.
Yes. So just to say, we want to keep growing in the grace of generosity as a community, And I slightly reworded Paul's letter to the Corinthians and for you all to see and to say this about this. You know, wouldn't it be, this is a great testimony for us as a church where we would be able to say, and people would say, now I want you to know what God in his kindness has done through New Life Church Fremantle. They are filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. That's a great testimony to have as a church, and for that witness to go around the world to places we'll never go to. And as we have been able to be generous to people all over the world, and looking back through the record of where funds have gone and the people, the thousands of people that this church has assisted both locally and internationally is quite staggering. And that reality of when we stand before God and we go, God, you were faithful and I was faithful with what you entrusted to me. And I gave generously to you, Lord. And God's promise has always been that those of us who are faithful in the little things, he will entrust us with larger things. So when we're being faithful with whatever amount of finance that we have, we're paving the way for the Lord to entrust us with greater things. And it always starts in our hearts by giving our heart first to him. And then things follow out of that. And so as we wrap up this series and this message today, I want to encourage you to say to the Lord, Lord, my heart first and my finances will follow. Because that's what you're after. You're wanting me to grow. So as we want to grow as a church in the grace of generosity, will you make it your own prayer as well, people, for yourself? To say, I want to grow, God. Or we as a family, those of you sitting together as families, dads, reach out and say to your family, let's us commit to grow in the grace of generosity. Let's ask God to increase this in us, so that we as a family will be, as a household, we will be a pipe that will flow through and be great blessing and honor for him and his sake. And so that when we stand before him, we'll say, Lord, it was our great joy. It was our great joy to release and grow in this grace of giving, growing in the grace of generosity. And you think, I wonder how far God will let us grow in that. That doesn't mean we won't be tested. Julie and I have continued to grow in the grace of generosity. But we've also experienced, even as we've given more, we've sometimes experienced where our own finances have been reduced. And again, we've had to say, Lord, we'll trust you. Our hope and our trust isn't in our finances. It's in you. So we will be faithful to you because we know you'll always be faithful to us. And God has been and continues to be faithful to us. And God will be faithful to you as you give yourself, your whole heart. You surrender to him as Lord. And say, yes, God, I'm going to bring my finances into godly order. I'm going to follow the biblical pattern. I'm going to grow in the grace of generosity to honor you. Let's bow our heads and pray together. Using again Paul's words from 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Verse 7. Paul said to them, since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, and your love for us, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. And Father, here we are before you as your people. We thank you that you are enabling us to grow in love, in worship and obedience as we've given ourselves to you. And we come back to that very foundation, the very first foundation that we laid at the beginning of this series, was that all of this is a response to the grace that you've lavished on us, God. You're not looking, you made the first move as you always did. And all our responses are a response to your grace, God. The grace that we have received through Jesus Christ. That grace that will enable us to stand in adoration and worship with the myriads of angels and the people from every tribe and tongue and nation around your glorious throne. We will stand forever in awe and gratitude. So God, we're asking you, grow us in this grace of generosity, the act of giving. Lord, not just in our finances, but in our time, in our hospitality, in all the other ways, that we'll be a people, God, marked by generosity, that it will be a characteristic of every household, every individual, Lord, in New Life Church. Continue to be a characteristic of us as a church, that when people hear of New Life Church in Fremantle, the testimony is that that is a generous people because they serve and love a generous God. Lord, make your fame great through our generosity. We pray for the honor of your name today and every day. Amen. Thanks for being with us. The team is going to lead us in a responsive song. We invite you to probably stand where you are. Maybe you'd like to kneel. I'll leave that to you. It's been great to be with you, everybody, today. And we're hoping that next Sunday we'll be able to meet back together in the hall. So we look forward to that. And of course, remember the prayer room hours back to normal on Wednesday. But remember the set tomorrow night. There's a set tomorrow night in the prayer room. And again, so we'll see you then.